We are live. Well, good afternoon, everybody, or good evening, depending upon where you are in the world. Sorry for the slightly late start here. Mea culpa. It's a tech issue. You'll notice Barbara and I are in the same place, the same time, which is unusual. She's usually signing in from her home, but anyway, you don't need to know all the technical stuff. We're delighted to have our friends Brian Freeman and Ryan Steck with us. Brian Freeman's brand new book is the latest in the Bourne series, The Bourne Shadow, and he's signed some books for us. I will go ahead and put a link in the comments field should you wish to purchase one. And here's Ryan's latest book right here, Out for Blood. And it comes with bonus novella inside, and it's already autographed. I'll put a link for that too. And if you have questions for either gentleman, just go ahead and put them in the comments field. And I guess I'm not going anywhere, so I can just stay here and monitor while Barbara does the interview. So we're going to do a little switcheroo here.
All right. We'll just
kind of
roll around,
Yeah.
right? Trying to run each other over. Fortunately, the three puppies went home, so that was a little chaos earlier. Hi, guys. Thank you for your patience.
Hey.
It's lovely to see you. And Brian, thank you for agreeing to share with Ryan.
Of course.
Yeah.
Of course.
No, it's really a pleasure. So it's perfect because, in point of fact, what we have are two iconic action characters. Brian has, if you don't know his other work, has written lots of other books, but he is, in fact, you have a new book coming out in September, don't you?
I do. Break Every Rule.
There
September
it
10th.
is. Okay. But Brian has been working in the Jason Bourne franchise. And I think because he's such a wonderful writer that those of you who have not tried it should really essay into it. I definitely think that Mr. Ludlum would be very happy with what you're doing. Yay.
Thank you. I love to hear that. That's really my goal, because I was such a huge Ludlum fan growing up. I really hope I'm doing him proud.
I think you are. And I really like, we're going to come back to it. I really like Time in Switzerland on this book. I have only Donna Leon. You'll be happy to know that you were featured on my interview with Donna Leon because she lives in Zurich. And so we talked about, and she obviously didn't quite know who you were, but at the same time, you know, she loved the fact that we were in Zurich. Ryan, on the other hand, is in Montana with Matthew Red, his character. And you may know Ryan from his work as The Real Book Spy. So Ryan, for those who don't, tell us what The Real Book Spy is all about before we talk about you as an author.
Well, it's a one-stop shop for all things thriller and mystery. So reviews and author interviews, exclusive news, cover reveals, book announcement, reading guides, everything you could want. If you love thrillers, you love mysteries, you probably find it on therealbookspy.com.
I love it. So was it scary for you to actually become an author? Because it's a lot easier to be a critic and a podcaster than to actually write a book.
It's so, you don't realize how vulnerable you are until you put a book out. And I'm friends with so many authors that when we had to get endorsements and I was sending my first book out to people, I realized how nerve-wracking that is, like, to be on the other end of that. And if there was nobody that just played it straight, I would always get like an email and it'd be like, hey buddy, here's your blurb. And it'd be like, you know, okay, book, don't buy it, just get it from the library. And then I would be freaking out. And then I'd get a follow-up email like, just kidding, here's your real endorsement, great job. So I think, you know, everyone had their fun the first couple of books, and no one did it with this one, thank God. So, but yeah, it was a hard try. I didn't feel like an author probably until this book. In fact, my wife was telling me, when people ask what you do for a living, stop putting a question mark at the end of author, because you're saying it like a question. And so it took me a while, I think, to feel comfortable and realize like, wow, this is my career now. So
well, it's wonderful news. I remember, unfortunately for you, that you were ill. And when your first book came out, didn't we do I think we did a Zoom, but you know, you weren't able to actually travel. So that's hard.
I tested positive for COVID the day my debut novel came out. Just like you always dream it would go down. Whole book tour was canceled. Everything was put on hold. And yeah, that was a little bit rough, but thankfully this one went smoother. And thank you for having me back, Barbara.
Well, it's really a pleasure. And since it's 117 guys, it's way better to be on Zoom than actually here at the moment. But I'm not giving up on Brian, who has moved from Minnesota to Florida, and therefore Arizona is not as seductive to him as it was when he was freezing his
Yeah,
butt off in
yeah.
Minnesota.
It's
Nonetheless,
it's only about 92 here. So
oh, too bad. Yeah, but it's a wet heat.
there we go.
Right. So, David Webb, 10 years ago, was working as a teacher in Zurich when he was recruited into Treadstone. So, tell us a bit about Treadstone. I'm going to sort of assume that people may not know what the Ludlum universe is like, Brian.
Yeah, I think a lot of people know Jason Bourne, frankly, at this point, mostly from the Matt Damon movies, which
Right.
even those movies are now getting to be, 15, 20 years old. But Jason Bourne is a great complex psychological character, because the essence of his character, starting back in Robert Ludlum's The Bourne Identity, was that he was shot in the head and lost his entire memory. So he
Right.
didn't know who he was, and he all he knew was that he had these special skills, and he went on this quest to try to find out who he really was and what kind of a man he was. And that's such a great psychological setup for a hero, because you can draw so much out of that complexity of trying to figure out who you are, and trying to figure out your moral identity even all these years later. And for an author, forgetting your past is sort of the gift that keeps on giving, because there's always wonderful twists and turns and drama, and there could be risks waiting around every corner that you don't remember and can't anticipate. But one of the things about Bourne is he was in the midst of this sort of shadowy organization called Treadstone, and that was at the core of the Bourne Identity. We've done a lot in both the Ludlum books and the von Luthbader books, and in my books, to talk a little bit about some of the things that went on with Jason Bourne that he has forgotten. But there was really never any point at which we went back to explore who was David Webb, who was this man that originally joined Treadstone. And so in The Bourne Shadow, I wanted to kind of go back and use that as sort of an origin story for Bourne, and so the setup is that he meets this woman in Zurich who remembers him as David Webb, and begins to tell him things about his past, and that don't agree with the stories he's been told by Treadstone of how he joined the organization and what his first mission was. And he realizes that there were an awful lot of lies and betrayals that came with that recruitment, and things that were going on back then that he never knew anything about. And then, of course, all of this violence begins to come roaring back to life in the present as well.
It does. It's an interesting way to create an unreliable narrator, in the sense that if you just wipe out, his previous identity, of course he's unreliable because he can't recall anything. I mean, it's a variation on, the whole Gone Girl thing that so dominates women's fiction primarily, although there are some guys that, that do that. So I really like that. I also find it interesting, Brian, that most of these, and Brian, I mean, Brian can speak to this too. Most of these guys belong to some shadow op. So Brad Thor, I sent out your invitation with our invitation to Brad Thor's book launch, which will happen here on August 4th. So he works for the, what starts with a C? Come on, Ryan, the Carlton Group. Okay.
Carlton Group. I got it right here.
Yeah,
Yeah.
there you are. So, so Scott's working for the Carlton Group. James Brollin's guys are working for Sigma Force, right? Brad Taylor's guys are, what's that one, Brian?
Task Force.
Thank you. Oh, God, it's so great to have Brian here. Anyway, so to really make these guys work, it almost requires creating some kind of not official, or at least off the books government. I mean, even Clive did that. Numa is a different deal. So do you think both of you should speak to that? Isn't it makes it possible for these guys to do things that if they were forced to actually conform to the real rules of the FBI or the CIA, is something they probably couldn't do?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's absolutely true. It gives you a little bit more flexibility in terms of how far you sort of push the conspiracy envelope, and you might feel a little bit more constrained if you were dealing with an actual agency. But then again, you look at the world today and you think, well, I think you could probably drag out plenty of conspiracies if you were
It's a
dealing with
scary
real
thought.
agencies too.
Well, the real agencies aren't supposed to have like actual assassins on their payrolls, even though you have to begin. Certainly, the Russians are not constrained by not having actual assassins on their payroll. And I'm going to recommend something to you. I'm thinking of this for Mark Graney because his next book is set in Finland. And so I'm finding him authentic Finland things to look at because he's not actually going to Finland. And there's a new thing on MHZ TV. Are you familiar with MHZ, either one of you? So it's
No.
like Margaret Henry Zebra, and everything on it is filmed foreign and mostly is in translation. There's a brilliant spy spoof set in modern Finland called Stop Newquist. It's hilarious. And I definitely recommend it. But in that, they play on this deal about, the Swiss have sent an assassin to Finland. The guys in Finland are setting up an assassin there. The Russians, meantime, are coming in. And I wonder, is this sort of mirroring what we're worried that real life is about? That we're really, because the Russians are clearly going around killing people. And
Well, and you'll note that most of us use the actual Russian agencies in the
Yeah.
books. We make them up on the
Yeah.
U.S. side, but we're happy to blame the real organizations over in Russia. So
that's a really good point. So Ryan, what's your thought about that?
Well, I was just gonna say, yeah, my series, the Matthew Red series, is localized to Montana, but I also took over Ted Bell's Alex Hawk series, and my first book in that series comes out on March 25th next year. And Ted really put Putin in his books, like he's a real character, and so I got to deal with them, And but I think Brian's right. We all use like the real Russian ops names and have no problem with that. And also, I would just say shout out to Mark Graney. Midnight Black is that next Gray Man. I think it comes out in February, and great cover.
It is. He just revealed it.
Yeah, Poison Apple with the Gray Man. I think Mark's at the top of the game, and I just want to speak real quick to Brian's book. You mentioned like the movies are getting old. I think what was weird when the movies blew up, the Bourne movies, people went and read the books, and I don't think the books were quite like the movies. I think it confused people that found the books because of the movies. And Brian has come in and kind of reset that series, and I just think he's done such an amazing job because you found that balance between, I think, old school Ludlum with like new school Matt Damon Bourne, and I really love what you're doing. I think it's great.
thank you.
I do
Thank you. I
too.
really appreciate
Absolutely. So you have a great action scene at the beginning before we ever get to Zurich. And I'm not always a fan of prologues, but I thought in this one that it really heightened the way that the book developed. Le Renouveau is the organization that the other side, not Treadstone, but it's like opponent organization. So is that something that you, because I read Ludlum and Forever, is that something you made up?
That was me. I was looking for sort of modern day conspiracies to work with because Ludlum had so many wonderful conspiracies from back in the Watergate and Vietnam days. But it's amazing how art imitates life and life imitates art. I mean, so many of the things I've dealt with in the Bourne books have strangely exploded into the headlines not long after. So here we have the Bourne Shadow, and it's dealing with far right influences on French elections. Well, that sounds kind of familiar, doesn't it? So.
Really scary all the way around. I think, I was always grateful to have been born in 1940 and skipped the 30s. And I really didn't expect in my 80s to be, I feel like, we're in 1933 at the moment and heading towards God knows what. I hope not 1939, but it is, just like publishing has trends. I've decided that, political organization, the whole bit has trends. We're trending towards autocracy. And who knows how we'll go back. So do you guys think of your books as being escape, or do you think they're really more almost like true crime?
So I hope it's an escape. I think right now, real life is so much crazier than fiction. Recent events, political events they're dominating headlines right now. If we'd have wrote them the way some of these things really went down, people would have never have believed it. They would have said, you did no research. You don't know what you're talking about. So, I mean, I come from, my favorite author in the world is CJ Box, is Chuck, and was so influential with me as a writer. I loved Vince Flynn. I love CJ Box. And I remember when I first started out, I told my agent, I want to write Vince Flynn meets CJ Box. And I remember my agent had like this really drawn out sigh, and he was like, what does that look like? And I was like, give me a year. Let's find out. And so I hope it's entertaining. I hope it's an escape. But I think with the Bourne books and what Brian does, certainly there's more mirroring real life a little bit. And I'm sort of there now with the Ted Bell books, with the Hawk books. It's supposed to be fun and an escape, but Ted wrote in real life care. I got Elon Musk in that universe. I've got Putin to deal with. So you do find that it's mirroring real life a little bit more. And I think Brad Thor is the gold standard at writing faction. Him and Joel Rosenberg beat headlines. Like it's wild. It's like they write the headlines and then the news agencies just copy them the next year. It's so wild that they do that. I just want to write entertaining, keep you up all night, kind of thrillers.
I think if you're in Montana, there's less of a, fear that it's going to be but Brian is so right. I mean, if what you're really worried about here is what's going on, a potential presidential election in France, that's really right. And the thing is, it takes so long to write a book. There's no way you could have anticipated, what Macron was going to do and how this was going to play out when you wrote the book.
Oh, I know. Sometimes it just works out that way, that everything kind of falls into place. I remember one of my Jonathan Stride novels is Alter Ego, and it was dealing with a Hollywood celebrity who was in Duluth doing a movie based on one of Stride's cases. And it turns out, of course, this celebrity was involved in a lot of seamy sorts of things and sexual misconduct. And it came out. I turned in the book, and I think it was the next week that the whole Harvey Weinstein thing exploded in the press. And yeah, my agent was calling me saying like, well, did you know something?
That's really scary. Maybe sometimes you pick up the zeitgeist. I often think that might be true. It's one explanation why sometimes several books come out and they're almost linked by, thematically or in terms of whatever they're examining. But let me go back to your opening thing in Switzerland, because you put David Webb in a truly horrendous position. And it was almost like one of those cliffhanger things that, where they end it just as it just happened and Stop Newquist, for example, that, the end one where the guy's wife is right behind him with a gun and you're pretty sure he's going to kill her. And then they fade to the next, and you're going, wait, what happened? Do we have to wait for a week?
Yeah, I always like to I always like to kind of grab the reader by the throat in the first chapter, and in this case, because the rest of the book was going to be set in the present, I wanted to at least have a glimpse of David Webb as David Webb. So who was he before he became Jason Bourne? Who was he really before he became immersed in the Treadstone universe, and get a sense of a more vulnerable, more inexperienced Webb that's really kind of struggling with this new assignment and this new mission of who he is. And of course it lays the groundwork then that you think what's going on in the prologue, but then as all the secrets begin to unfold, you realize that of course nothing is what it really seemed.
It seemed a little brutal to have him, being forced to kill his fiance.
Well, yes, but he didn't.
And then you just leave us, leave us. I mean, really, although, intelligent readers know there's still 380 pages to go. Something probably worked out. So, Brian, tell us about how your guy Matthew gets to be chasing across frozen Montana, because it's really cold up there in your book.
It really is. And I did mostly radio for this launch and was asked all the time by radio hosts, like, are you Matthew Red? And they can't see me, so I would just say yes. But in the books, he's 6'3.5" and 265 pounds of muscle. And the truth is, like, I think my wife wishes I looked more like Matthew Red. I love CJ Box. I love those outdoorsy books. I love Vince Flynn. I always wanted to know what happens if you take Mitch Rapp or Jason Bourne and you put them out west. And so my favorite Joe Pickett books are the ones with snow. And I'm from Southwest Michigan, close to Lake Michigan. We get lake effect snow. I know snow. I know those elements. I'd be the first one to tell you, even without a team of killers on my heels, if I was red and had to go up into the mountains in the middle of a blizzard, I'd be dead by nightfall for sure. But for him, this book is really about when he first came back to Montana in my first book, he had nothing, and he doesn't know who he is anymore, and he's been finding himself. Now he's happy. Now he's married. He has a family, but that's dangerous. He's got something to lose. And so when that's threatened and he finds out in the middle of this blizzard that there's a team of killers on the way to his front door, he has an hour to prepare. And that's not enough time. So he does the only thing he can think of, sends his family in one direction, and he goes up into the mountains in the middle of this blizzard, hoping to use the elements and fieldcraft to sort of even the odds. And it just takes off from there.
Okay.
Hey, Ryan, I've got a question for you. What do you think is driving the increased interest across various entertainment media in Westerns? Because
that's a good question.
You're seeing it with CJ Box and with Yellowstone and all the spinoffs of that. And you're doing that kind of thing. It just seems like there's suddenly a real revival of interest in Westerns. And I grew up in the 70s where, pretty much if you wanted a Western, it was Louis L'Amour. And, this seems like a whole new approach to Westerns. And yet it's becoming extraordinarily popular right now.
Yeah, I mean, it really is. I got to tell you, when I first signed my deal, I remember my agent and everyone telling me, don't call it a modern Western. No one reads that, so call it a thriller, call it a mystery. Then Yellowstone happened and it was the #1 show on TV. And everyone's like, make sure you say it's a modern day Western. I mean, it just flipped, completely. I think that re-energized it. But I do think in a world where technology dominates everything we do, we're all sort of like called to that. Go out west, just get off the grid, get away from your phone, get away from everything, and unplug and unwind for a while. And even myself, when I get one of Chuck's books, I can't wait to shut everything off and just sit and read it, and just hang out with Joe Pickett out in Wyoming. I mean, there's nothing like it. It makes me want to go there. Then I sober up real quick. Like I would never make it. I would be dead for sure. So I think we all want that to an extent, but we don't really want to live it ourselves, right? We don't actually want to not have high-speed internet. Not for long. It all sounds good in theory, but like after a day, I got 6 kids, man. If I was out in the middle of Montana right now, we lost power one time, and my son said, Daddy, can you call 911? And I said, honey, that's only for emergencies. And he's like, but we have no internet. It is an emergency. So, I think we all have that desire, we're pulled there, but we don't want to really commit to it. But it's fun to go visit it for a while and be entertained in that universe.
Guys, this is where your youth and my age are showing. You clearly do not know the 1950s when you could not turn on television without Bonanza or Gunsmoke or, Maverick or any of that stuff. And this is just the way genres roll, is that Westerns come up and something else goes down. And they haven't been up for a long time. So in that cycle, it's time for them to come back up again. Ryan has a number of interesting points, but this is not the first time that Westerns have begun.
Oh, sure. Yeah. But there was a long dry spell where
a very long dry spell. Right after you guys were doing a live event with Bruce Burgos. And if you did not read his first book, it's absolutely amazing. And the sequel is even more wonderful. And Ryan, do you know him as a thriller guy? You should.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, he's fantastic.
And I didn't think that he could ever equal the first book. And it turned out the second book is just as good, or, whatever.
I totally agree with you. Yeah.
Wow, just so amazing. And basically, it's like Nevada, Russian spies, 1950s, nuclear warfare, all this other stuff that you wouldn't imagine. And I thought, how is he ever going to write a sequel to this? And the first thing I see is a missile coming in and incinerating a prize bull at a barbecue pit, and it's like, how did he do that? So it is, it's a big territory, and there's room for lots of stories and lots of different characters. And
Yeah.
um, I think it's great that they are. Of course, I live here, so obviously I'm interested in more books with Western backgrounds. But
Thank you.
yeah, so I think it's great. Anyway, let's go back to wait, we didn't finish the story. Matthew is a decoy, essentially, or made himself, excuse me, into a
Yeah.
decoy in order to draw attention away from his family. And he's heading up into really terrible territory. Now, your book could be really short if that were the end of it.
It's
So,
true. Yeah, if I really was Matthew Red, it would be very, very short.
very short, right.
Yeah.
So Matthew obviously not only successfully manages to get up into the mountains, but give us a little hint without spoiling anything. What is
Yeah,
he
sure.
at that point?
Well, he finds a lot more trouble up in those mountains for sure. And doesn't have a lot of things going for him. He's on horseback. The one weapon he has is his dog, Rubble, who's a Rottweiler. And Barbara, I think you mentioned 3 puppies. I have 3 Rottweilers. So
They'd eat my cavapoo for a snack.
yeah, they're big. My dog Rubble is actually my real dog. Turns out I'm not that creative because I write my best friend into the series. I just write everything I know. But I was actually writing one day and I was like, Red needs a sidekick. And I looked down and my dog Rubble is 130 pounds, very loyal Rottweiler, really, really good dog. And I was like, yeah, I'm just going to put him in there. And so, it's a tale of survival for sure. I mean, that's a big part of it, and really explores how far will one man go to protect everything and everyone that he loves.
That's a very nice summary. Now you realize, of course, that the dog is immortal. A, it can never die, and B, it can't grow old. So you've got to, once you put a dog in there, you are hostage to the dog, right? That's just how it is.
It's true, because I've always been a dog person, but I'm like next level dog person, because this dog, everyone thinks, I get asked all the time, like, people ask me for advice training dogs, and I probably give all the wrong advice because I just got really lucky. My dog Rubble doesn't even like people hugging me. If like my wife or kids hug me for too long, he will wedge in between us and break it up. He sleeps next to me. He's just my buddy. He's very loyal. And I asked the vet, because he's 3.5, and I said, like, what would it take for him to live to be 20? Because I'm gonna need this dog for a while. And she was like, he needs to lose weight, first of all. So I got him right now on a workout plan and a little bit of a diet. I don't know if I'll get 20 years, but I think he'll always be immortalized in the books for sure.
Absolutely true. So save your money, because you can now actually clone your dog. Maybe you don't get it exactly. Well, we actually had a brief conversation about that, my husband and I.
Well, my wife and I did too. Yeah.
And then we went to Cavapoos. So they're not doing that. All right. So let's get back to France. Do you think, Brian, that, with the Olympics coming up, that there's going to be some lift given to your book?
Yeah, I don't know. Certainly, if anyone in France reads it, they're gonna get a little bit of chill up their spine and think that this was sort of anticipating what was going on over there. Yeah, the Olympics now. Well, that'll make for some interesting drama. So yeah. So yeah, I haven't put something like that in a book beforehand. We'll have to do that. The closest I came was, of course, in the Stride Book Marathon, where I blew up the Duluth Marathon. So
it's a great book, man. That's a great book.
Thank you. That was a real tough emotional book to write.
I can imagine. Just a quick digression, are you going to write any more Jonathan Strides?
We'll see how it goes. I've got Break Every Rule coming out next September, or this September in a few weeks, and then I'm wrapping up a new standalone mystery for Blackstone called Photographs. So that will be out next year. Kind of goes back to more of the feel of the Deep, Deep Snow. So a very
which is the book you were really proud of. I know.
Yes.
We talked about. We did a Zoom with it, if I remember right.
We did, exactly. Yeah. So I love Duluth and I love Stride as characters, but it's a challenge when you've got 11 books in a series. It's hard to invite new readers to the party, and because there are so many readers out there that feel like if it's a series, they want to go back to book one and read all the way through. And no matter how much I tell them that I write the books so that you can dive in anywhere. There are a lot of folks that they just have to read all the preceding books before they start, and that's asking for a big commitment when you're already 11 books into a series.
That's
So
very true.
so we'll see how it goes. I would love to get back to Stride, but at the same time, I always end each Stride book with emotional closure in such a way that if for some reason I don't get back to Stride, it will feel like kind of a full reading experience, and sort of put a finishing touch on the series with each book, so it feels complete.
So maybe you can retire him from the Duluth PD and move him down to Florida where he can pick up a new life,
There
following.
we go.
So in this book, you spend a fair amount of time in Zurich because you do have now Jason traveling from Paris to Zurich, where he hopes to, somebody's hunting him, right? Or somebody wants to see him and he doesn't know why. And
Right.
so why did you pick Zurich? I mean, is it because you wanted to go back to Switzerland where the opening scene was, or why?
Well, it actually has a Ludlum connection, because in the Bourne Identity, Zurich is the first place that Bourne goes to try to find his identity, because he's got this bank account number from a Swiss bank that has been implanted in a chip in his arm, and he ends up going into a restaurant called the Dry Alpenhauser, and sees someone who knows him from his past, and that's the first sort of clue of what's really going on in Bourne's life. So I kind of wanted to do a little echo of the original Ludlum novel, so I brought back the Dry Alpenhauser restaurant into the Bourne shadow, and there's a sommelier walking around the restaurant very similar to the character that Bourne meets in the Bourne Identity. So I deliberately chose Zurich as kind of an echo of the original book.
So that leads me to say that clearly, if you're going to step into somebody else's world and take up a series, you probably have to go back and reread the whole thing so you actually know what happened in the real Ludlums, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, and truly, I have lost count how many times in the course of my life I've read The Bourne Identity. It's probably 20 times, and that was long before I took over the series. My Bourne cred goes back far enough that I seem to be one of the few people who remember that before Matt Damon was Jason Bourne, Richard Chamberlain was actually Jason Bourne in an NBC miniseries with Jacqueline Smith of Charlie's Angels fame as Marie St. Jacques. So yes, I've loved Bourne for a long time.
Wow, when did Ludlum write them? Was it in the 80s?
Yeah, the Bourne Identity came out in 1980, the Bourne Supremacy in 86, and then the Bourne Ultimatum was in 1990.
Okay, and when did he die? Wasn't it the end of the 90s?
2001, I believe.
Yeah, that's what I thought. So, and was there quite a gap between the time he died and the time the estate decided to carry on?
There was, yeah. I don't think that the
so.
Von Luthbader novel started until, you might know better than me, Ryan, but maybe 2005, 2006,
Yeah.
somewhere in there. Because I believe, I think I have the timeline right. I think the
Yep.
first Matt Damon movie came out first, and it was the
Yep.
attention of the movie that drove them to revive the series.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Which is often how it goes,
Yeah.
it makes sense. Although today there's a much larger number of universes, legacy writing
Yes.
than there was. It was a rarer thing. I watched Clive set it up in real time, and so it seemed rather pioneering back when he finished. Trying to remember the full title, the Odyssey book, whatever. Anyway, that was the one in which he decided that he would like help with the heavy lifting if he wanted to continue to write, because the books had gotten bigger. And Orion will certainly
Yeah.
know too that, those original books were fairly small. And then, Trojan Odyssey, that's what it was called, required a lot more writing and also a lot more research, I think, too.
And Clancy, and I would just say I actually called Brian today about this.
Yeah.
When I took over the Hawk books for the late Ted Bell, I spent the 6 months I wrote it, 24 hours a day I had his audiobooks on. And actually, a funny story is Barbara got me into trouble and doesn't even know it. I went back to watch interviews with Ted. I worked with Ted behind the scenes for a decade. He was a good friend of mine. He's a mentor. And my first book in the Alex Hawk series is called Monarch. and I was under contract. I'm writing it. And I'm watching all these interviews, and one of Ted's last interviews he did for his final book, Seahawk, he was with you, Barbara. And
That's right.
I can't say what, although I'll be anxious to tell you sometime, not on camera. But you asked him a question that prompted an answer that made me go back and write a whole new opening for the book. So I actually called Tom Colgan at Penguin, and I was like, "What do you think of this?" And I pitched it, and he was like, "Yeah, it sounds terrific. Go write it." And I hung up the phone. I remember I was like, "Oh shoot, I have no idea how I'm going to write that." And so it took like 4 weeks of research and writing time to actually do it. And it literally all came from something that you asked Ted about a location. Would he ever consider taking Hawk, and what might that look like? And I was like, there it is. And so I ran with it.
So you're going to put me in the acknowledgments, right?
Yes, very much so. Yes.
Love it. All right. So Ryan, what would you care to ask Brian? It's hard with Brian and Ryan. Sorry, I'm really trying hard.
Well, yeah, we've got Brian and Ryan, and both wearing black shirts and everything, and both with the
Right,
glasses
well,
on. I don't know.
the blue cap
I think
really
we maybe
helps,
twin
but-
separated at birth here. So
I know.
Yeah, listen, I'm the co-pilot to you. I don't know how he does it. Like, seriously, I cover a lot of books, so I feel like I have to have a pretty good memory. And Barbara, I know you're a speed reader, and so am I. I take a lot of notes. I cover all these books, but now that I'm writing them and I realize how hard that is, right now I'm juggling multiple. So I have my series. I'm writing Ted's. I just signed a book deal to co-author with Simon Gervais, and we just did that announcement. And I'm like trying to juggle 3 different series right now. And then I look at Brian, and he's got like 1,000 books coming out. He's got all these different series. He's got standalones. How do you do that? Like, and I have a serious, genuine question for you. What is harder to write, a standalone or a series novel?
well, that's a great question, and I think they are both difficult for very different reasons. I mean, I think the challenge of a series book is that you need to keep it fresh. You need to be able to keep the characters growing and changing and evolving as the series goes on. I don't like books where I don't like thrillers where the hero essentially stays the same and you simply drop him down into a new setting and have new violence around him. I want the action hero to grow and evolve based on what's happening to him, and that gives the character more complexity. So a series book is a delicate balancing act in terms of keeping series readers happy without getting too much repetition in there for them, but also providing enough background that you're able to get new readers to embrace that book at the same time. The challenge of a standalone, of course, is you're starting from scratch, so everything is brand new, and you're establishing characters and plots right from page one. At least in a series, you sort of have the basics of the characters in your mind. It's not as creatively challenging to get inside the characters because you're familiar with them. So and in terms of writing multiple books, it's been a little crazy. Break Every Rule in September, that will be my 30th novel in 20 years, which doesn't sound like as much until you realize that I think in the first 10 years I was only doing a book a year. So the pace has gone up considerably in the last 7 or 8 years. I fortunately have kind of built up enough of a process that I understand what the demands are of me, and in terms of what I need to produce and the creativity involved and how I go about, writing a new book. And the other thing that really helps, it sounds strange, but what really makes it easier, quote unquote, for me, is that the books are also very different. If I were just writing books that were all pretty similar, I think that would be a lot harder to write multiple books for, because I think you would lose some of that creative energy. But I can pick up Bourne, which is full of action and adrenaline, and then I can switch over and do a deep, intricate psychological mystery like I'm doing now with Photograph, and then turn around and work on a Jonathan Stride novel, which is more of a police procedural mystery. And so they're all very different kinds of books, and that is what really keeps me energized.
That's a really great answer, Ryan. I would also say that, people who want to write standalones consistently really like world building. There's a whole different thing about creating a whole new universe with every book, the landscape, the culture, populating the character, whatever it all is. which is a different challenge than doing what Brian's talking about, which is in the series, they have to be all the same but different.
Yes.
And I think some people can do both and really enjoy it. Some people are happier in one universe or the other. Um, I mean, we've talked about cycles in terms of Westerns. I'm sure by now the romantasy thing has come to your attention. And I'm here to tell you that practically every book that is coming my way in the next few months is going to be in romantasy, which depends upon world building, but now they're creating series. But what they're doing, which I think is really exciting, is they are taking print technology and they are creating these absolutely beautiful books with 4-inch paintings and fancy, the whole bit at the same price as you would pay for a not beautiful book. And I think that this is going to change readers' expectations in some regards. Our friend Jack Carr bought 3 of them.
Yeah.
Because I said to him, wouldn't it look great if the 4-inch painting were guns or maybe the tomahawks that he lit up, And so we went into the store and he went away with 3 books and he's actually thinking about, wouldn't it be interesting to do that? So I think there's a large application here that may happen, but the reason I like it is that I think that it will bring people back to print books more, because
Yeah.
they're beautiful. And what better thing can you have that's a really beautifully packaged book with a great story? I mean, how wonderful is that? So, it's fascinating. This is going to be the 35th year of the store in October. I can hardly believe that. I know.
Yeah.
But
Wow.
in that time, when I look at the cycles of stuff, that have come and gone, we've been up and down with the Da Vinci clones. We've been up and down with serial killers after Silence of the Lambs. Gone Girl's going on, Now we have, the thriller thing at the moment is dying down a bit and the romantasy thing is going up. And when I say that, it isn't that thriller numbers are less, it's just their numbers are higher. And, I had that conversation with Daniel Silva the other night. He was going, God, I'm never going to get to #1 because, what am I going to do about whatever? I said, your numbers are the same. Their numbers are just bigger right now. And that's not anything to do with what you're writing or your readers or the universe. Is just publishing in its cyclical nature. So, who knows? I love it.
Yeah, I think, and I think it reflects the different ways that people are marketing to readers, and I think it reflects the growth of social media influencers and Instagram and TikTok in particular. That it pulls in large quantities of people that may not have it may not be sort of passionate readers, but they find something that influencers are excited about, and it pulls them into this genre, and suddenly the numbers, based on how many folks follow some of these people, the numbers just explode.
Well, they really, but I
start
want
writing book talk.
print books to come back, and I love the fact that it does excite people. There was some kind of a survey not too long ago that said that younger readers are returning to print books in higher numbers than expected, and I think it's because they lead their lives on screens. And so, when digital came in and it was a novelty, and people thought, oh, it's the death of print books and the whole bit. But now, when your whole working life for so many people is on a screen, it's not relaxing, And so, if you get this beautiful book and it could be a great story, there you go. So it'll be interesting. I'm saying that to you because I want you to think about how you might package your book. What would you do with Jason Bourne? If you could paint the edges of it, if you could do something, what would you do? I mean, I think it's a conversation worth having, worth thinking about, because it is.
Yeah, no,
it's so
that's
hard to
true.
market a book anymore. What can you do
it is
to kind of up the whole thing? Do you have cross guns? Do you have goats? I mean, whatever. I told Daniel you ought to really have a 4-inch painting with a goat, because the goat is what many of us read. It's what we want from Gabriel, right? Thank God he went back to Corsica in this book so we could have the goat back. I love it.
I feel like if anybody solves this mystery or cracks the code, it will be Jack Carr, and then we'll all probably learn from him.
Right. Have you bought the sunglasses?
Not yet, but that's because I have prescription lenses, so they do that. I'm in. But I will show you this. I do have I do have one of the Jack Carr watches, which this is why he's so great at marketing, Barbara. Jack sent me that, and I started wearing it around. I actually wore it to my own book signings, and people were noticing it, and they were like, "Oh, you know Jack Carr?" And I'm like, "Yeah, I know Jack Carr." And next thing I know, every interview, every book signing, I'm not even talking about me or my books. I'm talking about Jack Carr. And I was like, dang, he's brilliant. He's a good friend of mine, but I was like, I gotta get swag. I'm gonna have to make watches and start sending them to people. I gotta get Jack wearing something of mine. Literally, my wife had surgery and her surgeon looked at my watch and said, is that a Jack Carr watch? And I was like, are you kidding me right now? Like, and I'm texting Jack and he's like, hey, get his name and address. I'll send him a book. And I'm like, this guy, man, he's so relatable and he's so good about all of that stuff. So yeah, if there's anyone that cracks the code on it, I think it'll be him.
Well, wait for the romantasy packaging on the next terminal list.
Yeah.
See what happened. Right. So, Ryan, tell us about your book is coming out in the spring, and it's going to be the Ted Bell book. You want to give us?
Yeah. It's called Ted Bell Monarch. It comes out March 25th. I actually don't know what I'm allowed to say about it yet, but
okay,
we just announced it, so I think I can say King Charles is missing, and Alex Hawke is called in, has 72 hours to find Charles before there's a big vote in the UK that's threatening to, really pull it apart at the seams.
Topple the monarchy, huh? Love it.
Yeah, and so so Hawke is yanked out of Tea Kettle Cottage and is back into the action, and it was a lot of fun to write. I have to tell you, I finished it and it was like, this is my first globe-trotting big thriller, and then I had to go back and write my 5th Red novel, and I was like, man, my books are so simple. Like, they are so easy. They're in Montana. You're not trying to beat headlines. I am dealing with, for the first time, Brian, I'm in book 5, and I'm like, I don't know how much I need to reference of these first, so I am dealing with that. But I'm really excited. It was a 2-book deal, so I'm going to be working on the next Hawke book pretty soon, and I'm excited. And I need to get you an early copy, Barbara, so you can see the trouble that you got me in early on that.
I'll be interested in doing it. Are you keeping him at the same Luke's lifestyle, or are you going to dial it down slightly so he's kind of in the world of ordinary mortals?
Well, it's interesting.
Sorry, that's my comment.
Yeah,
I find them to be, sort of like, they're almost like Stone Barrington. I'm serious. They really are.
Well, there was issues because when I worked with Ted, I would say to him, hey, Ted, Hawke is still 33. And he'd go, yeah. And then we'd be 3 books later and I'd be going, hey, Ted, Hawke is still 33. And he'd be going, yeah. And I'm like, but you got his backstory. He's in the Gulf War. Like, there was issues here that I needed to deal with when I took the series over. So that got interesting. The lifestyle. Yeah, I think people are going to see there was a direction I've gone with here. My goal was always honor Ted. I was in a fortunate position to know kind of what he wanted to do. But what I would say is, and this will make sense when the book comes out next year, what he ultimately wanted to do isn't really what he set up in Seahawk. So I know I needed to go about things pretty gradually so it's not a shock to the readers. And, that won't make sense yet, but it will next year when people come back and watch this. But I'm really excited about it. Charles is missing. Hawke has 3 days to find him, and it's all kind of just taken off from there.
Sounds wonderful. I'm looking forward to it. Brian, can you give us a little more about your September book?
Yeah, Break Every Rule. I'm really excited about this book. Dave Temple, who runs the Thriller Zone podcast, just did his top 20 books of the summer, and Break Every Rule came in at number 1. So I was thrilled with that.
All right, so we haven't talked about what you and I are going to do about it, but
we do need
that
to talk
at the
about
end
that.
of this.
Exactly. But I was trying to create a hero in Tommy Miller and Break Every Rule who sort of combined the best qualities of Jason Bourne and Jonathan Stride. So I wanted an action thriller that Bourne readers would really enjoy, but I also wanted to have more of a mystery that would appeal to my other readers as well, my Stride readers. And so Tommy Miller is hiding out in Florida. He's had sort of a Bourne-esque background that he's running away from. And when his wife and his daughter are kidnapped, he assumes that his own past is coming back to haunt him. But as he goes to try to find them and find out what happened, he realizes that his wife was keeping secrets of her own. And so it becomes kind of an emotional mystery as he peels away the clues of who his wife really was, and realizes that it's kind of a story of redemption for him, because he needs to really find out all these things that he didn't know, and his wife and he need to stop keeping secrets from each other, because it's those secrets that are putting them in danger.
That's so eloquent. It's sitting at home winking at me from my art shelf for September. So I think I'm just going to jump over. Too bad, Don Bentley. I'm going to read mine first. I'm going to back up here. Patrick is going to want to come in and see what's going on. Questions, whatever.
Sure.
You
Yeah.
step
If
in.
you want to. You want to do it?
No.
All right. Okay, gentlemen. Yeah, so we have some questions that have come in from our Facebook audience. I'm going to show Barbara how they appear on the screen,
Okay.
which is pretty
A
cool.
lesson for me.
Yeah, and for instance, Renee, who's a regular viewer, says, "How do you juggle the different series? What method do you use to keep track of your series and your stories? Because I'm sure they all have all these subtleties and nuances of tone and even dialogue. And do you find yourself kind of slipping into different voices without knowing it?"
You want to tackle that first, Ryan?
Well, I can tell you, I drove my wife nuts for 6 months writing Ted Bell's Monarch, because I signed on the contract, and I mean, this dude's British and I'm not. So I was trying to learn the way they talk. I'm walking around stubbing my toe and calling everything bloody, and my poor wife had to deal with that. It is very different. I think what I had to go through was, one series is mine, one is not. It is Ted's. So I don't feel like I'm in control, right? Like I really just wanted to come in, and my goal was, every time Alex Hawke opens his mouth and talks, it's the same Alex Hawke that you knew and loved when Ted was here writing them. And so there's something freeing then about writing your own books. When I go back to Matthew Rhett, I feel like I'm really in the driver's seat and can do what I want. And when I'm writing Hawke, I'm really just trying to honor my late friend, the great Ted Bell. So I'm able to compartmentalize in that regard. One is mine, I can do what I want. One is not mine, and I just want to honor the guy in the source material. And so that helps me keep everything kind of organized in my brain. I don't know how Brian does it.
Yeah, I mean, Ludlum had such a distinctive prose style. It was very propulsive, very dramatic, sort of this breathless narrative approach. And I think that if you tried to imitate that style, it would end up feeling like a caricature. And so I've tried to let sort of dramatic elements of Ludlum style into my Bourne books, and what results, I think, is sort of a hybrid that's part Ludlum and part Freeman. It sort of becomes something very different, and hopefully that works for readers, that it still has a Ludlum feel to it, but it doesn't feel like I'm attempting to imitate the way Ludlum wrote. In my own books, I have a number of series. I write a number of different standalones, and with the series books, I know readers will often ask, do I, in fact, Ryan asked me this earlier, do I keep, sort of compendiums and lists of facts of things that, of what these characters are? And I suppose I probably should, because inevitably I know I make mistakes as a result, but I never want to reduce my characters to two-dimensional lists of facts. I want them to be three-dimensional on the page. So I would rather risk getting something wrong that I know readers will tell me about if I do, but have the characters really guide me, and to have me sort of be the, simply the scribe that is letting the characters, talk through me and get directly to the reader onto the page. So I'd rather let the characters take shape in the manuscript than sort of go back and try to keep them separate with different sort of files of who these people are based on facts about their background.
Where did the character name Stride come from? It's such a great name. You don't want to shuffle or stumble, or it's a very much an action name.
Yeah, well, some names are very deliberate, and some are sort of come from quirky little ways. Stride was very deliberate. He is a very northern Minnesota kind of hero, and he has this sort of step-by-step determination to get to the truth. You know, he's always kind of facing down that bitter Minnesota wind and moving forward. So Stride, just the essence of Stride captured that sort of step-by-step determination that he had. I contrast that with my hero Frost Easton, if you drive along I-90 in Southwest Minnesota, you will actually pass a highway sign where the town of Frost is in one direction and the town of Easton is in the other direction. And we passed that sign years ago, and I said to Marcia, "Ooh, Frost Easton, that's a great name. I'm going to have to use that."
All right.
Let's
So
see.
here's Stefania. There,
Yeah.
I thought that was a good question.
Why don't you ask it?
All right. Is there a book by some other author that you wanted to write? If you could have chosen, Ryan, if you know you're doing Ted, but what? Well, obviously, if somebody knocks off CJ, that's the one you would want to have.
I mean, he's my hero. Mitch Rapp is too. My youngest son's name is Mitchell. After his name is Mitchell Ryan Scott Steck with one T. So Barbara, you know exactly who that's after. And yeah, I mean that would be a huge one. I absolutely love Chuck's stuff so much. If I could go back, just like replace a book, you know, like this person never existed and I wrote it, it would probably be The Terminal List, seeing what's happened with Jack Carr. That's a good question. I'd have to think harder about it, I think.
How about you, Ryan?
Well, you know, it may sound strange coming from a thriller writer, but if there were a legacy opportunity out there, I wish some publisher would be reaching out to James Michener's family and saying, you know, we need to bring the Michener style back into books. Particularly having moved to Florida, I feel like Michener never did Florida as a book, and there's just so much wonderful stuff about Florida's background that it deserves to be a Michener novel. So if the folks at Random House are out there, you know, they ought to be, you know, calling up the Michener family and say, hey, you know, that would be a good time to bring that style back.
That whole era of the big sagas, you know, like Herman Wouk and
oh yeah, Trinity
yeah.
by Leon Uris. I mean, yeah,
and wasn't Richard Chamberlain in all of the movies?
yeah, pretty much. Yeah,
I think he was.
I never think
pretty
of
much.
an action hero
I know.
either.
Yeah, the
Seems
fact
very
that
defeat.
the fact that he could be Shogun and Jason Bourne and then the priest and the Thornbirds. Yeah,
it's very true. He did have a monopoly. My favorite Michener was The Source. I never warmed to another Michener the way I warmed to
The Source was one of my favorite novels of all time. Truly, just a magnificent book. Yeah.
Righty-ho. So let me think. Do we ever? Here's one I sort of like too, by the same. Stefania is our fan from Italy who stays up way too late to do these things. Have you ever changed your mind on a topic after doing research about it for one of your books? Have you ever gone in thinking, you know, that you knew something and then it turns out that research redirects you?
No.
Okay. How about you, Ryan?
Oh man, that's a good question. I learned a lot of interesting things about fire. My next read novel is called Gone Dark, and it comes out next summer.
Ooh, great
I won't
title.
say what yet because it spoils the book a little bit, but I really thought I would know the gist of like what to do in a wildfire, and it turns out I had no idea at all. I started researching and learning about smoke jumpers. That's a crazy career, by the way. They literally are dropped into the middle of like forest fires and wildfires to fight them from the inside out. And so that was something that started as I sort of went down the rabbit hole and researched for the book and ended up using a lot of it in the story because I was so kind of blown away by what I learned.
Yeah, research is always that delicate balancing act. I remember reading an interview with Ludlum years ago where somebody asked him, you know, how much research he did, and I loved his response. He said that I do less than my readers think and more than my family believes. And for me, I always think of the research in the books. If you're familiar with the movie Somewhere in Time with Christopher Reeve and Jane Seymour, it was a time travel movie. And the way that Christopher Reeve ultimately realized he wasn't in the past, he was actually in the present, is he found a modern day penny in his suit. And I always tell readers that's my idea of research, is I want to avoid pennies. I don't want to write anything that will suddenly jar you out of the world that I've created, whether it's a factual thing, whether it's how something should be done, whether it's police procedure, whether it's no, that restaurant's not on that corner, it's on the other corner. So those are the kinds of things I'm researching to make sure that I'm not doing anything that's going to sort of burst readers out of that fictional world.
Not to mention, they will write to you endlessly about how you got it wrong.
They certainly
And
will.
endlessly, by the way. I fictionalized the town that Matthew Red lives in Montana. It's called Wellington. It doesn't exist. And I made up like a location, and immediately got an email about it when the book came out. And someone's like, that's not where that is. I had made the whole thing up. I didn't even know it really existed. And it turns out it did. And it was in Montana, nowhere near where I put it. And I had to write back and explain, like, I'm so sorry. I've had readers like send me emails that are like, you can't take this highway and get here from Wellington. And I'm like, well, that's interesting, because Wellington doesn't exist. So, you might be able to, it's not real, but that was, I made that decision based off of research. So I guess maybe that's the real answer to the question, is I started researching where would I put Red's hometown. And I realized pretty quickly I was going to go the CJ Box route and just make up a location that fit my needs.
Well, and the other side of the coin, I wrote a book called Thief River Falls, which is set in an absolutely real town in northwestern Minnesota. And everyone from my editor to my agent to most of my readers thought I had made the town up. It's like, no, it's a real place, honest.
Love it. Well, thank you, guys. It's been absolutely wonderful to spend some time with you. I'm sure we're going to do this again. Let me remind everybody that we have autographed copies of the Bourne Standard, and out for
blood.
Can you turn it so, because Ryan's very proud of the orange sponge.
Tangerine, I found
There
out.
it is.
Nice,
Right, so
We'll
there
do a
we are.
little
Right.
sign.
All right, wonderful. Thanks very much for joining us, everyone. We apologize again for being a few minutes late, but it was well worth it, wasn't it? Bye.
Absolutely. Thanks, everybody.
Take care.
Thank